My name is Olivia Hayes, and this morning, I sat in my Manhattan office with the city skyline glittering behind me like a crown I never thought I'd wear. The silk of my blouse whispered against my skin as I leaned back in the leather chair I bought after signing my first $1 million contract. Everything around me, the quiet hum of my computer, the faint aroma of my lavender candle, reminds me I'm living a life I once only dreamed about. But here's the twist. The very dream that fuels this reality was the same one my parents mocked, dismissed, and laughed at. As I stared at the screen, my phone buzzed. The name flashing on it stopped me cold, Mom. A text, short and sharp. "We're in New York. Can we stop by?" I could almost hear her voice, laced with that mix of criticism and false sweetness I grew up with. My chest tightened, but not with fear, more with irony. They had once told me I'd starve chasing silly fantasies. Now they were about to walk into the empire built from those very fantasies. For years, I've kept my success close to the chest, never bragging, never correcting their assumptions that I was just getting by. Today, that secret would finally come to light. I picked up my phone, my manicured nail clicking against the glass, and typed back one simple word. Yes. Little did they know, the daughter they once ridiculed was about to give them the shock of their lives. I was 17 when I first said it out loud at the dinner table. "I want to be a designer," I told them, my voice trembling but steady enough to carry across the room. I had sketched dresses for years in the margins of my notebooks, dreamed of runways, fabrics, colors no one else could see the way I did. For me, fashion wasn't just clothing, it was storytelling. My father put down his fork, gave a sharp laugh, and shook his head. "Designer? Olivia, that's not a career. That's a hobby." My mother didn't even look up from her plate. She muttered, "You'll grow out of it. You should focus on something real. Nursing, teaching, anything that pays the bills." The heat rushed to my face. I felt my hands tremble beneath the table, fingers curling around the hem of my sweater. My throat ached, a hard lump rising with words I couldn't swallow. "But this is what I love," I whispered. Dad smirked, stabbing another bite of chicken. "Love doesn't pay rent, sweetheart." The sting of their laughter that night cut deeper than any rejection letter ever could. To them, my dream was a punchline. That evening, I locked myself in my room, tears soaking the pages of the sketchbook I held like a lifeline. I wanted to burn it, to prove them right, but I couldn't. My drawings were the only place I felt like me. A few days later, my grandmother, Evelyn, stopped by. She always seemed to notice what others ignored. She found me sketching quietly by the window. Without a word, she handed me a small, worn pair of silver scissors. "They were mine when I first started sewing," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Don't let anyone tell you your dream isn't worth fighting for. The world needs people brave enough to create beauty." I remember clutching those scissors, the cool metal pressing into my palm like a secret weapon. That night, for the first time, I made a silent promise. I won't let their voices drown out mine. So while my parents laughed, I began to plan. I researched fashion schools, studied online tutorials, and squirreled away babysitting money. With every sketch, every late-night scribble of fabric patterns, I stitched together not just designs, but the first threads of my independence. The day I mailed my first application felt like breaking chains. Moving to New York was nothing like the movies. My first apartment was a shoebox above a noisy bodega in Queens. The wallpaper peeled in strips, the radiator clanged like it was angry at me, and my mattress sat directly on the floor. My savings from babysitting evaporated within weeks. Most nights, dinner was instant ramen and black coffee, eaten while sketching under the dim light of a flickering lamp. Still, I never felt freer. Fashion school pushed me harder than I had ever imagined. Professors criticized without mercy, assignments piled up like mountains, and I worked part-time at a cafe just to cover my rent. There were nights when my hands shook so badly from exhaustion that I could barely hold a pencil. More than once, I thought about packing up and going home. But then I'd glance at the small silver scissors on my desk, Grandma Evelyn's gift. Just touching them reminded me why I was here. I wasn't living for approval anymore. I was living for me. It was in my second year that I met Clara Mitchell, one of my instructors. She was sharp, elegant, the kind of woman who carried herself like she owned every room she entered. Clara didn't smile easily, but when she saw my portfolio, she paused. "You have an eye," she told me. "Raw, but undeniable. Don't waste it trying to imitate others. Find your own voice." Her words lit something in me. She became more than a professor, she was a mentor. Clara pushed me harder, sometimes to the point of tears, but she also opened doors I never could have found on my own. She introduced me to small designers who let me intern, taught me how to navigate ruthless critiques, and reminded me that failure wasn't the end, it was data. The wins started small. A boutique bought one of my dresses. A local magazine featured my sketches. I still remember holding that glossy page, my name in tiny print, and crying in my bathroom because it felt like proof. I wasn't crazy. By the time graduation came, I had built a modest but promising collection. Clara pulled me aside, pressed a business card into my hand, and said, "Call this man. He's looking for new talent." That call led to my first real commission, designing a capsule line for a startup brand. It wasn't glamorous, but when that paycheck cleared, I stared at the balance in disbelief. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was building. Of course, my parents knew nothing. Whenever they asked, I kept my answers vague. "I'm doing okay. Just keeping busy." I didn't post photos of the runway shows I assisted with or the small studio I eventually rented in Brooklyn. I let them believe I was just another struggling dreamer. Part of me wanted to prove them wrong, but a bigger part wanted to wait. Wait until the moment was so undeniable, so breathtaking, that even they couldn't dismiss it. Every late night, every design rejected, every blister from pinning fabric, it was all fuel. I wasn't just chasing a dream anymore. I was quietly, steadily living it. And I was only getting started. The day they arrived, New York was bathed in late afternoon sunlight, the kind that painted the skyscrapers in gold. I had arranged for them to meet me at my office, though office hardly covered it. By then, my studio had grown into a full-fledged design house in Soho, with floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, and racks of my collections lining the space like soldiers ready for inspection. When the elevator doors slid open, I saw them step out. My mother in her usual pressed beige coat, my father straightening his tie though no one had asked him to. Their eyes darted around as if unsure they were in the right place. "Olivia?" Mom's voice carried that familiar note of skepticism. "Are we supposed to meet you here?" "Yes," I said calmly, walking toward them in my tailored navy dress and heels that clicked with quiet authority against the floor. I could see it in their eyes. The confusion, the unspoken question. This wasn't the picture of struggle they had been expecting. A few of my assistants passed by, greeting me warmly. One handed me a clipboard for approval, another whispered about a shipment arriving early. My parents watched each interaction with growing disbelief. Dad finally broke the silence. This is where you work?" "This is what I built," I corrected, gesturing around the studio. "Every design you see here came from me. My team brings them to life, but these," I motioned to a rack of gowns shimmering under the lights, "they started in the pages of my sketchbooks." Mom pressed her lips together, scanning the room as though searching for cracks. "But how? You said you were just managing." I almost laughed at the word. Managing. For years, that's all they thought I was capable of. "I didn't correct you," I said softly, "because I wanted this moment. I wanted you to see with your own eyes what you once told me was impossible." I led them toward the wall where framed magazine covers hung. Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Elle. My name was printed boldly under headlines like "The Visionary Voice of New York Fashion." Dad's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked smaller somehow, as though the weight of his old words was finally catching up to him. "And this," I continued, opening the glass doors to a conference room overlooking the skyline, "is where I signed my partnership deal with one of the biggest fashion houses in Europe. I own 40% of this company. Last year, our revenue crossed 8 figures. The silence that followed was thick. I studied their faces, the shock, the guilt, the dawning realization. For once, they had no ready insults, no dismissive laughter. Just the quiet reckoning of people who had underestimated someone they thought they knew. Mom finally whispered, "Olivia, we had no idea." "I know," I said, my voice steady, though my chest ached. "You didn't want to know. You didn't believe in me enough to even try." Dad swallowed hard, staring out the window as though the city itself could offer him answers. We just didn't want you to get hurt. Dreams can be cruel." I shook my head. "No. Mocking someone's dream, that's cruel. Fighting for it, that's survival." For a moment, none of us moved. The tension in the room felt electric, like the seconds before a storm breaks. And then, for the first time in my life, I saw it in their eyes, not pity, not scorn, but something closer to awe. I had become the woman they never imagined I could be. And now, they were standing in the empire that mockery built. I motioned for them to sit, and they lowered themselves into the sleek leather chairs across from me. For once, they looked unsure of themselves, like strangers in my world. I folded my hands on the table, steadying my voice. "I know why you came," I began. "You didn't just want to visit. You wanted to see if I had failed, if I'd finally be ready to admit you were right." Mom flinched, her fingers tugging at the strap of her purse. Dad stared at the polished table, silent. "But I didn't fail," I continued. "I fought. I sacrificed. And now I've succeeded." The air between us was heavy. A part of me wanted to let them stew in guilt, but another part, the stronger part, knew I didn't want to carry bitterness forever. If there was going to be a future between us, it had to be on new terms. "So here's the deal," I said, leaning forward slightly. "If you want to be part of my life now, there are conditions." Dad finally looked up, his brow furrowed. "Conditions?" "Yes." My tone was calm, but firm. "First, you never mock anyone's dream again. Not mine, not anyone else's. You don't get to decide what's worthy or real." Mom's eyes glistened, though she quickly blinked it away. "Second," I continued, "you start supporting Lily." They froze. Lily, my younger sister, was still in college, an artist at heart, always sketching and painting in the corners of her notebooks the way I once did. I'd seen her Instagram posts, the ones she probably hid from them. "She wants to pursue art," I said. "And I won't let you crush her spirit the way you tried to crush mine. If she chooses that path, you stand behind her. No mocking. No guilt trips. Only support." Dad opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. "I'm not negotiating on this." I took a slow breath before delivering the last condition. "And third, you both need to look at yourselves. The way you dismiss people, the way you use control as protection, it's toxic. If you want a relationship with me, you need to start unlearning those patterns. Therapy, reflection, whatever it takes. But I won't let your old ways back into my life." The silence after that was deafening. Mom finally whispered, "Olivia, we didn't realize how much damage we caused." My throat tightened, but I didn't let my resolve slip. "I know. But intent doesn't erase impact. I'm giving you a chance because I still care. But it has to be different this time." For the first time, Dad's shoulders slumped, his voice low and hoarse. "We'll try." I leaned back, feeling the weight shift in the room. The power dynamic had flipped completely. I wasn't the fragile girl begging for validation anymore. I was the woman setting boundaries, demanding respect. And they had no choice but to listen. The days after our meeting felt strangely quiet, like the air after a storm. My parents didn't change overnight, but for the first time, they didn't fight me. Instead, they listened. A week later, Mom called, not to criticize, but to ask how my latest show in Paris had gone. Her voice was hesitant, softer than I'd ever heard it. Dad sent me a text after months of silence. "Saw your interview on Bloomberg. We're proud of you." The words were simple, but they landed with the weight of a lifetime I'd waited for. And then there was Lily. She called me late one night, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Liv, Mom and Dad actually told me to go for it. They said you made them realize they were wrong about dreams." I smiled so wide my cheeks ached. Good. Because you deserve the chance to try. It wasn't perfect. Old habits slipped through sometimes. But slowly, cracks of light began to show where walls had once stood. One evening, after a long day at the studio, I found myself sitting alone in my office. The skyline glittered against the glass, and beside my sketchbook lay the same small pair of silver scissors my grandmother had given me years ago. I picked them up, tracing the worn handles with my thumb. Grandma Evelyn wasn't here to see all this, but in some ways, she was the reason it existed. Her faith in me, that quiet belief when no one else had it, had been the spark that kept me alive in my darkest nights. I whispered into the empty room, "I made it, Grandma." And I realized then, it wasn't just about proving my parents wrong. It was about proving myself right. I had taken the laughter, the mockery, the doubt, and I had turned it into fuel. I had built a life not from permission, but from persistence. A life where I chose the fabric, the patterns, the colors of every single day. When people ask me now what success feels like, I tell them this. It feels like walking into the very place you were once told you'd never belong and owning it. It feels like freedom stitched into every seam of your story. And as I looked out at the city that once felt so terrifying, I smiled, whispering the truth I'd waited years to say out loud. They mocked my dream once, but now I'm living it.